Welcome to 6 African Trade Talks, the show that brings you closer to the intra-Africa trade business world. I'm your host, Chad Chawanda. In this episode, our guest is Patience Namubiru. Patience is a domestic taxes officer with Uganda Revenue Authority. Patience, welcome to 6 African Trade Talks. How are you?
I'm very well, Chad. Thank you very much for this great opportunity. I've had about 6 trade talks and I have been following it. So I'm really excited to be part of this.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have you. Before we start, we'd like to hear a word from our sponsors.
Would you travel to Cape Town for business or leisure? What if you could combine the two? Well, you can. With Optimum African Experience, Cape Town Leisure Experience, with partners such as the University of Cape Town, CEDA, Medina, Luminary, and Prime Focus. Experience the best of Africa.
So, Patience, before we start, what is the one thing, could be a turning point, something that not many people know about you?
Something that not many people know about me is that I pray about everything. I pray about even the smallest details. So I really pray about everything. I think that's what most people don't know about me. And what has been my turning point, I got a chance to work with the leading microfinance in Uganda. And it opened up my eyes to so many challenges that most small and micro media enterprises in Uganda were going through. So I think that was like my biggest turning point.
Thank you. Quite interesting. Who is Patience? Please take us through your journey thus far.
I'll start from my bachelor's. I did a bachelor's from Chambogo University. It's one of the best universities in Uganda. And I got qualified in accounting and finance. So I joined an audit firm in 2014. So that was really the beginning of my journey. I worked as an audit assistant, then I worked as an assistant in quite a number of projects in the audit firm. But eventually, I left the audit firm and joined Pride Microfinance. I'm sure most people have heard about it because it's one of the leading microfinance institutions in Uganda. So I worked with it as a credit officer. And as a credit officer, it helped me gain so much knowledge about micro, small, and medium enterprises. And like I said, that was like my biggest turning point because I had a background in audit, in taxation. Then I joined this institution and most of their businesses were done informally. So I learned a number of things, a number of loopholes, a number of areas where these people were struggling. I got to see how big it was a challenge to them to access finance to better their businesses. So in 2018, I left Pride Microfinance to join the Uganda Revenue Authority. When I joined Uganda Revenue Authority, the background that I had with these small enterprises, now I had to go to the other side. Initially, I was giving them finance, but now I had to collect taxes from these people. It was a bit challenging for me at first because I knew the challenges these people had been going through. I knew how the struggles of these people, and now I had to go the other side to start collecting revenue from them. So that's when I got interested in doing tax research. So I started doing tax research. I joined the African Tax Research Network. It's a body under the African Tax Administration Forum. I joined this tax research network and started doing research. My first research was on compliance management in the small and medium enterprises. Then as I was researching about compliance management, I realized that, okay, there is actually a bigger picture to see from these small enterprises. How can they get from being small enterprises to being bigger enterprises? That is how I got interested in international trade. So in 2019, I started pursuing a postgraduate diploma in international trade law and trade policy. So here I am now. I completed the international trade law and trade policy postgraduate from Arusha in Tanzania. And I'm currently pursuing my master's in international trade law and trade policy. It's awarded by the Lund University. So that is who I am, and that is my journey.
Wow, amazing. Thank you very much for sharing your journey. You're a tech
Charles.
specialist. What does a tech specialist do?
I won't say exactly what every other tax specialist does, but personally, I do tax research, and this tax research is used both by the institution, by the URA, to implement policies, and some of the writings that I have written are used to enable different tax institutions to use the information on implementing policies. But my biggest interest right now is in trade. I'm very, very passionate about trade. My tax research is mainly bent on international trade.
Interesting, thank you. And that obviously aligns with the Africa Continental Free Trade, Intra-Africa trade. So looking forward to learn from you. What is your take on the AFCFTA achieving its goals in relations to the tax and trade policy differences across the 54 countries? We've got 54 countries. They all have different tax regimes. How do you see this coming together?
I think the biggest issue right now with the differences that are in the 54 countries, most of the situations in the countries are similar. Let me just look at the sub-Saharan African countries. If you look at the African countries in the sub-Saharan region, they're all facing more or less the same challenges. You realize that most of them are exporting primary products, they're exporting agricultural products. Most of them have little or no industrialization. Yes, there are a few countries which have really maximized on industrialization, but those are really, really few. Despite the fact that, yes, there are many, but there are very many conditions which really cut across the whole of Africa. So I believe that my take would be that if we as African countries could work together, could collaborate, then this would give us really mileage on achieving the goals of the AFCTA. For example, if you look at Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, or the ESC countries, if we could collaborate, then we could make the AFCTA work. And among the areas where we can collaborate is that I believe we can take great strides in exchange of information. Like exchanging of information, I think would help us to combat issues that could have really enhanced cross-border tax evasion.
Thank you for sharing. It's quite interesting to see how, from a tax perspective, the FCFTA will come out. Different tax and trade policies across Africa today. So, Patience, what major role do you think technology plays in the implementation of different tax and trade policies across Africa today?
I think technology really plays a very huge role in implementing these policies, because let us look across the borders. You look at a country like maybe Uganda or South Sudan. Recently, we had scanners installed by the URA at the borders. So with these scanners, it helps us to know if maybe someone is bringing in fraudulent products that are restricted. Those are things that could not easily be achieved without the presence of technology. It really plays a big role. It plays a big role also in e-commerce. You know, there is a lot of trade right now taking place over the internet, and without technology, we wouldn't be able to track all those transactions that take place over online businesses, e-commerce. All that would not easily be taken note of. Then we look at, I think most African countries have recently implemented digital tax stamps. Initially, countries were losing a lot of tax revenue without those digital tax stamps, but now it's way easier to track production using those digital tax stamps. Technology has also enabled the ease to transfer information. You realize that if you're importing certain commodities into Uganda, you will need information from various departments. Let me take an example of medicines. Some medicines which are prohibited within the countries. So if you don't have information that can easily be got from maybe the National Drug Authority of that country, it may be hard for you to track and to prohibit importation of such commodities. Recently in the URA, we've introduced the bonded warehouse information management system. This system also improves cargo and supply chain information sharing. So all these could only be made possible with the presence of technology. Then most customs organizations within Africa are using the SCUDA system. All these would not be possible if we didn't have technology in place. Though I realize that most of African countries are suffering from network connectivity. So of course we need to find a way of also improving on such areas. But really for technology, it's a very, very big contributor to improvement of tax collections within the region.
It's quite interesting if we use technology because of how many Africans are even on mobile phones. It's interesting how technology will impact the change and improvement in movement of goods and taxation across the continent. So thank you very much for sharing. Before we continue, we'd like to hear it from our sponsors.
Would you travel to Cape Town for business or leisure? What if you could combine the two? Well, you can. With Optimum African Experience, Cape Town Leisure Experience, with partners such as the University of Cape Town, CEDA, Medina, Luminary, and Prime Focus. Experience the best of Africa.
Do you think culture has played a vital role in the implementation of the trade and business policies among the different countries? Based on your experience, how does culture play a role?
Based on my experiences, I'll use a few examples from Tanzania, from Kenya, from Somalia. I think culture really plays a very big role in the implementation of these trade policies. Culture involves religious beliefs. For example, for Somalia, you realize that even though a business may be really viable, it may not be accepted in Somalia because of their religious beliefs, since they look at the religious beliefs at a big platform compared to what the trade policies may be able to impact on the nation. Then for these other African countries, I think culture still plays a big role. When you look at the women and the youth in the different African countries, yes, they are involved in trade, but most of them are not involved in trade at a formal level. So it is a bit hard to track the revenues that are coming from businesses run by the women and the youth, and yet the actual composition of trade in Africa is mainly informal. So it becomes even harder to track all the revenues from that informal trade, because the people who are taking part in that trade may not really be considered valuable within the different African states. So I believe that culture really has a big role to play in the trade policies.
You know, what you have said, it's amazing to look at it that majority of intra-Africa trade is happening informally, and it's
Yes.
mostly driven by women. How do we train them to become formal so that they can scale their businesses and get access to different instruments and opportunities that can make them succeed and become bigger and better, and being able to change as well as leaders in businesses?
I've seen the FCTA do some work on women and gender trainings. I believe there is so much work for us to do as trade experts, as tax experts. We need to train more of these women, because they are the ones who are actually leading in the informal trade. We need to increase public and private partnerships with these women and the youth.
Certainly. Being a traveler, what business opportunities have you observed in Africa? Where do you think there are opportunities in Africa?
Being a traveler, first of all, I look at the air transport services. That is a very big area that could be invested in. Because I'll take an example, there's a time I was traveling to Senegal, but I had to go up to Dubai and then be able to go to Senegal. So I think we need a huge investment in the air transport sector, especially the fact that when the AFCTA is implemented, there is going to be a lot of trade. There is going to be a lot of traveling that is going to be required. For instance, there are some goods which will really be required to be transported by air. Take an example of perishable commodities. You may not easily put those on road, and yet movement by air, it's still a big challenge. So I think we need to invest in the air transport business. Another thing is I realized like some of these countries have so many BASAs, like bilateral agreements within themselves to carry on those air transport services, but they still limit those services to other countries. Like you may find that a plane will not go to a certain African country. They're not supposed to use that route. So really that is a big area that needs to be invested in. Then another area could be manufacture of bulk cargo containers. That is also a challenge. I realized that within Africa, I think I tried to look for manufacturers of bulk cargo containers within Africa. And there was maybe, I think it is only South Africa where these cargo containers are manufactured, because the fact that we are all looking forward to the growth of the AFCTA, we are looking really forward. We're anticipating a lot of cargo is going to be moved. So that is going to be a big area to invest in. Then we need to look at light manufacturing and value addition of our agricultural products. I mean, all African countries are trading in more or less the same things. How do we add value to our goods to make them competitive? For example, you realize that there was little or no intra-African trade taking place. You look at China being one of the major countries where African countries have been importing from. So how do we also benefit from the AFCTA? We need to start maybe light manufacturing and value addition to our agricultural products. We need to invest in our infrastructure. I think there's a lot to be done with our infrastructure, rail, road, so that it becomes easy for the AFCTA goals to be achieved.
Thank you. These are all opportunities. I always say some of our major challenges are our biggest opportunities. How do you think trade and tax policies in Africa can be improved for the growth of the AFCFTA?
I think in regards to improving our trade and tax policies, first of all, we need to make sure that we are building trade policies and tax policies which are coherent, which are in sync. Among the goals of the AFCTA is that we want to see a liberalized economy. So if you're implementing trade policies that are geared towards improving liberalization, but then decide on the tax policies, you're implementing policies which are creating more non-tariff barriers, then it becomes a problem. So we need to make sure that the tax policies and the trade policies that we're implementing are in synchronization with each other. I think there is need for the African states to build a political will that is geared, that is forward-looking and outward-looking. Because some of our African states still have inward-looking investment policies. They're really trying to protect what they have. They are trying to, you look at their land policies and their land policies don't favor investment. You look at their schedule of commitments that they make, and you realize that these schedule of commitments made are in a way increasing barriers to trade. But then on the outward, they're saying that they are also looking forward to achieving the goals of the AFCTA. So how do we handle that? We need to make sure that we continue sensitizing people and sensitizing the different African states so that the will to achieve the goals of the AFCTA. So that can also be done through sensitization, I think, like I've explained. Then we need to work with the private sector or the stakeholders who are the key stakeholders. For example, if you're looking at a country, most of these policies are implemented without getting ideas from the key stakeholders of that state. Yet, for the policies to actually work, it is important to involve the private sector because they are the biggest contributors to the tax revenues. So it is important to also involve the private sectors or the key stakeholders in particular states. Then I think as African states, most of us are still lacking a monitoring and evaluation mechanism. So there's a lot of work to be done in monitoring and evaluation. For example, we implement, yes, we come here, we talk about all these policies, we talk about all the things that we can do. We start implementing them, and then 1 or 2 years down the road, all these policies have not actually been used, or they're actually not working, and there is no one to even police their implementation. I think we need to develop responsibility centers for monitoring and evaluation of our trade and tax policies. Even as we do all this, we need to put in mind, despite the fact that the African continent is more or less the same, how are we going to manage the different sizes of the economies? While implementing these trade and tax policies, it is important for us to consider progressive liberalization. I mean, if you're looking at maybe South Africa and you're implementing trade policies in South Africa as a big economy, those same policies may not exactly work for a small economy like Uganda or for Burundi. So as we're implementing these policies, we need to put into consideration the progressive liberalization, because maybe some of the policies may not exactly harm the tax base of South Africa as much as they're going to harm that of Uganda. I think we need to also keep carrying on these peer reviews and benchmarking. Like, for example, in Uganda recently, we've got peer reviews from Angola, from Kenya. So we need to keep working together to ensure that these tax policies and the trade policies that are actually working in a different country, we see if we could benchmark. How do we learn from our other countries? How do we learn from the neighboring countries? What are they doing right? What are they not doing right? And how best can we learn from their mistakes or from their advantages, from the benefits that they've been able to attain?
Would you travel to Cape Town for business or leisure? What if you could combine the two? Well, you can. With Optimum African Experience, Cape Town Leisure Experience, with partners such as the University of Cape Town, CEDA, Medina, Luminary, and Prime Focus. Experience the best of Africa.
Africa is a continent full of potential, but potential means nothing if we don't take action to create value. Let us take action. Thank you for listening to this episode. Don't forget to post and share this episode on your social media platforms. It will help us reach our mission of sharing knowledge about intra-Africa trade and making it available to as many people as possible. Let us grow our continent. We can go far, fast, together. If you can please leave a review on our podcast page or on Apple Podcasts.